Record.
Hello.
How you doing? Okay, good evening. We are tonight learning for Refuah Shlema for Ram ben Leah Chasha. Refuah Shlema was in the ICU at Ichlov, young man who is in an medically induced coma. He needs Refuah Shlema, as do all Chol Yisrael, including Am Yisrael. Okay, we finished last week, Perek Yud Aleph, and I said that Perek Yud Bet is majority also names, which is true. But we're going to look at, there's a couple sections we're going to look at besides names and topics we'll discuss tonight. That will then bring us probably still tonight, maybe not, till Perek Yud Gimel, which will be the last Perek we will do in Nehemia. Okay, and as far as the future, we will talk about that at a later date. So let me put this on my screen so you can see my book is too small. Okay, we're going to begin to read Perek Yud Bet, chapter 12. And again, this is mentioned last week that these almost last prakim, Yud Aleph and Yud Bet, or 11 and 12, were kind of put here near the end because between Ezra and Nehemia, both books do a lot with lists. And it would appear Nehemia did not want to interrupt the regular flow of the whole book. At this point, he pushed these lists toward the end of the book, but we'll see why also shortly when we get to a little bit further in the chapter. Ve'ela kohanim v'alvi'im asher alu im Zerubbabel ben Shaltiel v'Yeshua Seraya Yirmiyah Ezra. So these are the kohanim and Levim who came with Zerubbabel and Yeshaya and Yeshua. That's a name we're going to come back to. And Seraya, Yirmiyah, and Ezra. Amaya Maluch Chatush Shechanya Rachum Meremot Ido Gintoi Avia Mimamin Madaya Bilga Shmaya V'Yoyariv Yedaya. Before we continue, for 1,000 shekel and a chance to move to the bonus round, if you look at Pasuk, hey, the last name is Bilga. If someone can tell me what was significant about the family of Bilga, it's also the end of a Masechta. I forgot which one offhand. Don't remember. Anyone have any idea what I'm talking about? Okay, we'll come back to that. Maybe. I mean, that wasn't on my agenda tonight, but the name came up, so I figured I'd mention it. Shmaya, again, we're continuing in Pasuk Vav, number 6. Shmaya v'Yoyariv Yedaya. Salu amok Chilkiah Yedaya el Rashi Kohanim v'achehem b'mei Yeshua. So these were the Kohanim. It almost sounds like they were Kohen Gadol. Maybe we'll see that. We're going to talk about that in a minute. In the times of Yeshua, v'Haleviim Yeshua Benui Kadmiel Sheravia Yehuda Matanya al Haidot u ve'echav. Ubakbukia ve'uni achehem lenegdam lemishparot. They and their brothers were worked in different shifts in the Beit Hamikdash. Yeshua holid et Yoyakim, Yoyakim holid et Eliashiv, Eliashiv et Yoyada. Now, this name Yeshua has come up multiple times right now, and now it also gives lineage. It tells the names of his son, his grandson, his great grandson. Question is, how come he's so important? What's really going on here with these, with this mentioning so many times of this individual? So let's take a look at the first slide. Where's the hip? Let me make this bigger. Yeshua hayazaken ba'aloto la'aretz. Yeshua was an elderly individual when he came on Aliyah. And with him came his sons and his grandsons. And they gave birth. They had their own children in Israel. During the time period of which this sefer was written, all the sons and grandsons of this individual, Yeshua, became inheritors of the seat of the Kohen Gadol. We already saw earlier in Perek Gimel, Pasuk Aleph, that Yashiv was the Neched, the grandson of Yeshua, Kohen Gadol be'et bo'o shel Nehemia la'aretz, that he was the Kohen Gadol, when Nehemia came to Israel. When Nehemia came the second time, there was another person, now the great-grandson, Yoyada was then in charge of, he became the Kohen Gadol. Yoshua, Yoyakim, Velyashiv, Vule Af Yoyada Lumi Bavel. So all these people, all these Kohanim, this one specific family, all seem to have come together on Aliyah from Bavel. Yeshua Kizaken Me'od. Yeshua is a very elderly person. Gambino Begil Kashish, even his son, he was very old, and he says that his son also was old. Vito Beno Benechto. Along with him came his son and grandson. Hakuna Gidula Avra Maher Lidei Nechtoshi Yeshua Eliashiv. So the seat of the Kohen Gadol transferred pretty quickly to the hands of the grandson of Yeshua, whose name was Eliashiv. And he also served as Kohen Gadol, not for a very long time. And by the second go-round that Nehemia comes to Israel, Yeshua should be Kohen Gadol. So now we're in the fourth generation has now taken up seat in the Kohen of the Kohen Gadol. So what's really going? What's all this turnover? The Fia Mekubal Biyadenu, and this is why specifically Nehemia mentions this family and also the son, the grandson, the great-grandson. The Fia Mekubal Biyadenu, as we have a Masorah that tells us, Higia Alexander Mimokdon. That's the Hebrew for Alexander. No,
the Great.
The Great. Thank you. That Alexander the Great came to power just a short time after Sefer Nehemia. As haya ba'aretz Kohen Gadol b'shem Shimon HaTzadik. Now you know that Shimon HaTzadik. Now he was the Kohen Gadol, and also the last remnant, as we know from Pirkei Avot, of the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah. Yesh Omrim, and I mentioned this before at least once, that the Shimon HaTzadik's kever, which is in the Shimon HaTzadik neighborhood, where I have the zechut to have a daughter and a son-in-law and almost a grandchild, Bezrat Hashem, is one of the few kvarim in Israel that we know 100% that it says who's buried there is really the one who's buried there, and he really is there, as opposed to many other kvarim. Some say that he was actually the sixth generation from Yeshua. So evidently what was going on in the early days of Bayit Sheni, that there was a turnover multiple times of the Kohen Gadol. It was what happened also towards the end of the second Beit HaMikdash. Sheshimshu bikuna gdula after kufot tzarot meod. So also at the end of the second temple period, the end of Bayit Sheni, the turnover in the office of the Kohen Gadol was also pretty quick. Amnam lo mita'amim domim. But the fact that there were multiple Kohanim Gedolim at this point in a quick succession, and then later on, before the second Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, are not for the same reasons that there was the turnover. Because it had to do with the rule of who was ruling Israel at the time, which we will eventually deal with that, which ended up causing, it became mostly a political office, a politically appointed office. It was not even someone who was necessarily religious who was being put into that position, which is very hard for us to wrap our heads around. When we come on Yom Kippur and we talk about the Avodah and the Beit HaMikdash, and Kodesh Kadashim, and we talk about Zara Karev Yumat, and a person who's not the Kohen Gadol goes in there, you're going to die, and all these wonderful things. But in any case, the turnover was caused mostly for political reasons towards the end of Bayit Sheni. And here now, the work, the Avodah was very difficult. It also tired them out quickly. There were some Kohanim Gedolim who just said, look, I need my child to do this. I can't do this anymore. We'll see in the next chapter with Eliashiv, this is going to be what's going to happen with him. I didn't want to finish this slide. Never mind. Okay, we'll just put this down to the next one. I'll leave that here. Let's go back into the text. Taking off my glasses, but I need them still. Okay, so we are now on Pasuk Yud Aleph number 11. ויהוידע הוליד את יונתן, ויונתן הוליד את ידוע, ובימי יהויקים היו כהנים ראשי האבות, בישריה, מריה, לירמיה, חנניה. The time Yoyakim that there was a structure to the Kohanim. We've seen this already quite a few times, especially in the Sefer Ezra. We saw that there was not really a pecking order, but there were people who were in charge of different groups within the Kohanim for different jobs that they were to be given. And it gives us the names of that Pasuk and Bet. 13. LeEzra, Meshulam, LaAmaria, Yehochanan. For Meshulam was the head of the group of Ezra, and Yehochanan was the head of the Amariah group. Now continue with this concept. Limlichu Yonatan l'Shavnaya Yosef l'Charim Adna l'Marayot Chalkai l'Ido Zechaya l'Ginton Meshulam l'Avya Zichri l'Minyamin l'Moadia Piltai l'Vilga Shamua l'Shmaya Yonatan. Let me just tell you briefly. Actually, let me take a quick look and find it here. Beit Bilga le'olam. Hold on. Something I think you will find, I hope, find interesting, and I forgot to have this ready. Bilga le'olam. Mishmeret Bilga. Okay. Right. So just give me 1 second here. Okay. This is the end of, I know it's a siyum far for where it is the end of Masachet Sukkah. Okay. I just didn't remember which end. Okay, so I'm going to read something to you. I'm not going to put it on the screen. The Gemara tells us as follows. Bilga leolam choleke b'darom v'ta'avata kivua v'chalona situma. The family of Bilga in the Beit HaMikdash, now this Bilga that's mentioned here, always divides up the food the Kohanim of their family would get in the south, as opposed to, that's not, in other words, in the wrong location. And the ring that was meant for shchita for the family was sealed, and the chalon that they had access to for various things was sealed. In other words, this family received a punishment for what? Miriam bat Bilga, because of a woman whose name was Miriam, who was the daughter of Bilga. Shenaset mumeret, she threw away her Judaism. So she pretty much became, the word sardiot in English is satrap. And you'll see that also, you see that translation in Megillat Esther. But she was basically working along with one of the kings of a foreign nation. And when the non-Jews entered the Heichal, the Beit HaMikdash, Ba'ata v'tafcha al gago shel mizbeach. She came in and she started to, on the top of the mizbeach, she started to say, Amralo. She said to the mizbeach, Locus, locus, ad matay atam mechale et mamonem shel Yisrael. Locus is the Aramaic of ze'ev, like wolf, wolf. How much longer are you going to destroy the money of the Jews? Meaning, how much more korbanot have to be brought here, waste of money? And you don't help them when things are bad. Another story is that the reason that the family of Bilga had these fines against them was because that they were lax one time in coming on to the mishmeret, to their shift on time. Okay, fine. So this is, I actually, years ago, I said something that the gentleman who did the Daf Yomi in our shul, who I describe him like I have other tremendous individuals that he will forget in one day what I won't know an entire lifetime. Tremendous Talmud Chacham. So he had made a siyum on this. Yes, and it's a famous line, locus, locus, to speaking to the into the Mizbeach in a very derogatory way, that you are just consuming the money of the Jews. And I said that we could change this word a little bit and say luxus, luxus, luxury, luxury. That people are so involved in money and having to have the bigger houses, the bigger cars, and the bigger this and the bigger that. It just eats up the money of the Jews. So he liked that. So I figured, okay, if he liked it, I'm okay with it. Let's continue. Look in Pasuk Yud Tet. When we get to Pasuk Kaf Zayin, we're going to take another slide. So Pasuk Yud Tet. Again, these are just the people who were in charge of the various subdivisions, of the Kohanim. Kafbet 22. Halvi'im b'mei El Yashiv, Yoyadav Yochanan b'Yadua, Tuvim Rashi Avot, v'Kohanim al Machut Daryavesh Aparsi. The Levim and the Kohanim were listed by the heads of their groups in the time of Eliashiv, Yoyada, etc., all the way down to the reign of Daryavesh, the Parsi, the Persian. B'nei Levi Rashi Avot, the heads of the groups of the Levi'im, Ktuvim al Sefer Divrei Hayamim. Those are listed in the book of Chronicles. That does not mean our book of Divrei Hayamim. V'ad Yemei Yochanan ben Eliashiv, to the time of Yochanan ben Eliashiv. Instead of listing the, he's telling us that they're also, let me just go back a second. If you remember, we learned Sefer Malachim. We saw many, many, many times, Elohim Ktuvim al Sefer Divrei Hayamim l'Malchei Yisrael, or Elohim Ktuvim al Sefer Divrei Hayamim l'Malchei Yehuda. There were books of Chronicles, which is basically records of the kings and their activities and everything else. And there were other books of Chronicles that were kept also during Bayit Sheni, and telling us that all this information that's here in Sefer Nehemia, there was more information in these other books of Chronicles. To my knowledge, there's nothing of this that we're referring to exists anyway. We have no actual physical records. By the way, speaking of physical, some of you may have noticed, seen in the news, a story about what's called the, my mind just went blank, the something codex. Someone remind me. Not the Syrian Codex. Oh, man. It's the oldest known written...
Aleppo Codex.
No,
Aleppo.
Not the Aleppo. It's not the Aleppo
Codex.
Not. It's something else, more recent.
Yeah.
It'll come to me. It's being sold for basically $30 million.
Yes.
They're saying it's going to be the most expensive written artifact in history to be sold. Yeah, so it'll come to me. If you remember, maybe someone wants to do a quick Google search. It's not the Aleppo Codex, though. Kaf Hey, Matanya. Kaf Dal. V'Rashi Levim Chashavya Sheravya v'Yeshua ben Kadmiel v'Acheim lenegdam alel hodot b'mitzvat David Isha Elokim mishmar l'umat mishmar. So what was this? This is the Levi'im. Remember, the job of the Levi'im was multiple. Mostly was to do with music and singing within and playing musical instruments within the Beit HaMikdash. And they were gives names, and they were in charge of those of the singing of the mitzvah David, the words of the rules of David, and they served in different shifts. I mean, they were singing Tehillim, which, by the way, David did not write all of Tehillim. Moshe Rabbeinu wrote some, Adam HaRishon wrote some, Asaf wrote some, like Mizmor LaAsaf, which, by the way, I think is a very appropriate Mizmor to mention right now. But let me just finish the sentence, and I'm going to come back to that. And we're going to see a little shift here for a couple minutes within this chapter of more than just names. It's going to give us some information here. So I'm going to go just like take a little pause here for a second, mentioning Asaf. There is one of the Tehillim, I forgot which number, starts off Mizmor LaAsaf, Bo'u goyim benachalatech. It's a Mizmor, it's a Tehillim that was written by Asaf, who talked about the fact that the non-Jews had entered the Heichal. Midrash asks, Mizmor, this is a Mizmor, Kina LaAsaf mibayilei. It should be a dirge. What do you mean it's a Mizmor? What do you mean? So it goes and explains that how, again, very similar theme to Tisha B'Av, why it is on the afternoon of Tisha B'Av, we relaxed the restrictions, even though that's when really most of the fire took place and burning the Beit HaMikdash. So too, because in that time, it was showing that Hashem was taking his anger out more on the Eitzim va'avanim, the wood and the stone, than he was on his people. So the fact that the Goyim came in, and the anger was taken out eventually in the house of God, and not so much on the people. And yes, of course, there was destruction. There was galut and everything else, but he didn't wipe out Am Yisrael. Okay, so let's continue. Let's take a look at Kafhe 25 and 26 and what did I say? 27. Take a look at those three, and then we'll take a look at the slide. Kaf Hey 25. Matanyahu v'Akuya Uvadia Meshulam. Talmon Akuv Shomrim Shoravim Mishmar. Now we're mentioning these people we've talked about before. And remember the job of the Shoarim, the gatekeepers. Ba'asupei Hasharim. And they worked by shifts in the hallways leading to the gates. Ele bimei Yoyakim ben Yeshua ben Yotzadak uvimei Nehemia Pecha. Ezra Kohen HaSofer. These names already now you should know these names already from multiple times between Yeshua, but especially Nehemia and Ezra Kohen HaSofer. Now you'll notice this is giving the titles to these two individuals. Nehemia was a Pecha. We also said, remember, that's the title of a governor. That title was given to him by dint of the fact of what he did there in the country. It was given to him by the king of Paras, of Persia. And Ezra Kohen, remember, he was more of a political leader, and Ezra Kohen HaSofer was more of the spiritual leader. Now, here's where we take a little bit of a turn beyond just a listing of names. We know that in the 8th parak of Melachim Aleph is the consecration, the Chanukat HaBayit of the Beit HaMikdash, the first Beit HaMikdash. We also know that there was a rededication of the Beit HaMikdash, the second Beit HaMikdash, after it was defiled by the Syrian Greeks. There was a rededication. And we know, of course, it's the story of Hanukkah. But this is to my knowledge, the only mention, could be wrong, but I think it's the only mention of an unusual Chanukat HaBayit, in quotes, because it's not the Chanukat HaBayit, it's not the dedication of the Beit HaMikdash. But listen what this is, Kaf Zayin. The Chanukat Chomat Yerushalayim, the dedication of the wall of Yerushalayim. Bikshu et Halavim mikol mekomotam, they requested of the Leviim wherever they were living. La'aviyam liYerushalayim, they should be brought to Yerushalayim. Why? La'asot Chanukah v'simcha v'todot v'shir, to make a joyful celebration and dedication with thanks to Hashem and with music, mitziltayim, nivalim, v'chinorot. There should be, the music was accompanied by cymbals, harps, and lyres, Lyre. So what's going on here? Let's take a look what really is happening in this idea of suddenly they're dedicating the wall. Let's take a look at the next slide. Make this a little smaller. Hold on a second. Hold on 1 second. I'll double check something there. Yeah. Okay. So let's read this. Let's read this next slide. It's 2 slides actually. There are certain rules that apply, as we know, to the area of the Beit HaMikdash. There are certain korbanot that are only allowed to be eaten in a certain location up to a certain distance from the Beit HaMikdash. Same thing is true with Maaser Sheni. The Mishkan, in the time of the Mishkan, before the Beit HaMikdash, when it was in the Beit HaMikdash, in the desert, when they had the Mishkan, the original Mishkan, as we are just now reading about. So the place was delineated by the curtains of the Chatzer of the Mishkan, the courtyard. Chomat, so that was there. But what about in Yerushalayim was the Beit HaMikdash? Chomat Yerushalayim shimsha b'makom ha'klayim shebemishkan. The walls around Yerushalayim serve as this function in place of the curtains of the Mishkan. What does that mean? That was the area within which, if a person had a korban, they're allowed to eat it only within those walls. Now, for those of you who've been to Shiloh, you'll know that if you are in Shiloh, where the Mishkan stood for 369 years, you know that you can see through a large area. To this day, broken pieces of pottery all over the place, which some in the ground, on the ground, all over the place. And the rule back then was that wherever you were at the time of the Mishkan in Shiloh, as long as you could see the Mishkan, you could eat your korban. So that's why sometimes you have mountains that are not very close to Shiloh, where they were you'll find a lot of pottery shards because of the fact that they broke them after they ate from them, because they could see the Mishkan Shiloh and were allowed to eat it. In the time of the Beit HaMikdash, they had to eat most korbanot within the walls of the Beit HaMikdash. According to one opinion in the Gemara, so what did they do before the wall was built around Yerushalayim, before it was finished? So before that time, according to one opinion, they used still the curtains to dedicate the area, to designate the area, Hadiyah HaKlalit. Sorry, that was the first opinion. Hadiyah HaKlalit, the more accepted opinion is, that when the Beit HaMikdash was first consecrated, is the right word in Hebrew, in English, when it was the Kedusha was instituted into the Beit HaMikdash, that Kedusha remained kayemet gam lachar shenechrav ha'ayir, even after the city was destroyed. And when the Jews came back to Yerushalayim, meaning even though there was no wall, as long as you were within the area of the Beit HaMikdash, that area during the time of the first Beit HaMikdash was the area with which you could have eaten, even though the wall was not yet complete, you were allowed to eat there. Now, there's a concept of Kedusha L'Sharta and Kedusha Le'atid Lavo, which basically translates into that something is made kadosh for a temporary time while it was in existence. And then for the other is it's in perpetuity, it's holy. Why is it that when you go on the Har HaBayit today, for those who go on Har HaBayit, you have to go to the mikveh first, you have to go barefoot, you're also not allowed to go in certain areas. I mean, there's no Beit HaMikdash there, unfortunately. As of this evening, as of right now, there's no Beit HaMikdash. So we'll see it tomorrow. But right now, if you went up to Beit HaMikdash, to Har HaBayit, there's areas you can't go. And if you do go there, you have to, in the areas you can, you have to, like I say, go up to the mikveh, you go barefoot, but there's no Beit HaMikdash. Because the Kedusha Bayit Sheni is Kedusha Latid Lavo. It is Lanetzach. It's always a perpetual level of Kedusha. That level of Kedusha will even be increased when we have the Beit HaMikdash, Be'ezrat Hashem B'karov Yameinu. Im kain, lo ya'achrech b'choma l'shem Kedusha mechadash. So he's pointing out to us the fact that they made this new wall. It wasn't really necessary as far as like sanctifying or consecrating this area because it already was. But Nehemia did this public demonstration of sanctification. He wanted to root into the people, so to speak, to entrench into their heart the recognition of the kedusha of the city. Remember that once there was a split, only one generation after Shlomo HaMelech, there's a split in the kingdom. There's the people who go to called the Northern Kingdom, which is Malchut Yisrael. There's Malchut Yehuda, only 2 tribes. So 10 tribes, for the most part, almost never even got to Yerushalayim. In some cases, because of Yerovam ben Nevat, they were prevented from going to Yerushalayim. So they didn't really have a true recognition of the Kedusha of Yerushalayim. Now, where there is no 2 different kingdoms, now that the Jews are both in Yerushalayim and outside Yerushalayim under one is, I can't even call it a kingdom at the moment. It's called a commonwealth. Nehemia wanted to instill in everybody this awe of the Kedusha of Yerushalayim. דבר שעורר לפעמים ספק גם בבני ממלכת יהודה, מבואר במקומות רבים בספר מלכים. הדברים נכתבו לדורות בצירוף שמות של... So this idea of this consecrating of the wall or the instilling it with Kedusha was written here in Sefer Nehemia along with names of the Anashim Shayu Eidim Me'orah. They were along with the names of the witnesses who saw this event. זה מעין שטר קדושה שעדים רבים חתומים עליו. It's כאילו a shtar, a document, a contract of kedusha, and these people were the witnesses to it. Now we can also understand, the way from his explanation of that Sofrim, why these two chapters, 11 and 12, are next to each other. The prior chapter we saw that the Jews did actually sign on a document to accept upon themselves what it says in the Torah, to follow in the ways of the Torah. And then in addition to that, they expanded on some of the power of the Torah, not the power, but the rules of the Torah. Now they're taking upon themselves through Nehemia, an acceptance of the Kedusha of the place. There is a very let me just close this up here a second. There's a very well-known machloket of poskim nowadays, and not just today, but prior generations, of whether or not one can go on Har HaBayit. There is no, you can't say one answer is right, one answer is wrong. In other words, those people who believe that you are, and I told you, I've been up there once, that say that you can go up, you can't say that the others are absolutely wrong. And the people say you absolutely cannot go up there, cannot say the ones who go are absolutely wrong, although they do. There's a stand as you walk from Shara Shkot, as you walk towards the Kotel. There's a stand of people who have these little booklets and flyers explaining why nowadays you're not allowed to go up to Har HaBayit at all. However, for those who do, you have is beyond al mili smoch, upon whom to rely. We know that there's a machloket within our own rabbanim in the community. Rav Rabinovich Zatzal held you could, Rav Aviner and others cannot. Again, you have to do what you can't do what you feel is right. You have to do what you have to ask your posek. You have to ask the person you get your halachic advice from, your hashkafic advice. But everyone agrees, no matter who you agree with, whether you agree that you're allowed to go up or you're not allowed to go up, everyone agrees that there's a level of kedusha in Har HaBayit that doesn't exist anywhere else. And I repeat that that's in spite of the fact that there's this ugly building with a gold dome on top of it that was built around 1,200 years ago, a little over. And in spite of the fact that there are people playing soccer up there, Yamach Shemam, and people who are doing all kinds of things that shouldn't be done in Har HaBayit, nevertheless, we also know that that place is holy. And here, Ezra and Nehemia is involved in a process to instill in Am Yisrael this feeling of Kedusha. Because when you think about it, they didn't really have a true model. Many of those who are now coming back to Yerushalayim, or were born now, or came as babies, or born in Israel, don't have a model other than some form of a prayer and some form of Beit Midrash, which of course they had in Bavel. We know that. And they had shuls, the equivalent of whatever that meant at the time, or what they did in them. But as far as like the level and the power of the Beit HaMikdash area, they didn't have. So according to Dat Sofrim, that's one of the reasons that not only doing is Nehemia doing this public Chanukah, this public dedication, that's also what, by putting the names with it, making it kilo, they're witnesses to this for future generations as well. It's Kafchet number 28. ויאספו בני המשוררים מן הכיכר סביבות ירושלים חצרי נטופתי. So the group of singers got together from the Yarden, from the plains, and from the areas around Yerushalayim, and from the Tofati villages. ומבית הגלגל משדות גבע ועזמוות כי חצרים בנו להם המשוררים סביבות ירושלים. It tells us a historical fact that, interestingly enough, that surrounding the general, we would call the suburbia of Yerushalayim, they had places where these mishogarim lived, that these Levi'im and the singers would live. So they'd be, as what we would say today, close to work. Vitaru HaKohanim HaLevi'im, number 30, Pasuk Lamed. Vitaru HaKohanim v'HaLevi'im. The Kohanim and the Levi'im had to go through a Tahara process. I'll explain in a minute. Vitaru et ha'am, they purified the people. Et ha'sharim et ha'choma, and also the gates and the wall. Likely, this is referring to using the ashes of the Parah Adumah, which is also timely since this week we're reading Parshat Zachor, and we're coming up then after that to Parshat Parah. Just a reminder this week that if you have not been paying attention, this week is Parshat Zachor. Read it. It's a chiyuv d'oraita to hear. If a person misses it, they can make it up. God forbid they're sick or for whatever reason, or otherwise involved in something that prevents them from going to shul. They can make it up on the morning of Purim, listening to the Kriyat HaTorah. And again, if there's some reason they're not there, when you get to Parshat Ki Teitzei during the course of the year, sometime in August usually, when you hear Parshat Ki Teitzei read, and you come to the end of the parak, at the end of the parasha, and it reads the words of about Amalek, Yimach Shemo, and you have in mind to be Yotzei, you're Yotzei the mitzvah as well. So you have multiple ways. The best, of course, is to do it, to go to shul, to hear it on this Shabbat. Pasuk Lamed Aleph. Ve'aled Sarei Yehuda. Now, suddenly, Nehemiah is reverting back to first person. He then says, I had the officers of Yehuda, Me'al Choma, to go onto the wall. Va'amidah shtei todot gedolot. And I appointed two choirs that are like for singing of thank yous to Hashem. One marched on the south, on the wall towards the Shara Ashkot. Keep in mind, the wall around the old city today is not this wall. The wall around the old city, built by Suleiman, is only about 500 years old, which in terms of archaeology is relatively new. By Lamed Bet, we still have the same name, but it's in the same location. I'm not the archaeologist to be able to tell you that. I don't know. That's something I have to check. Lamed Bet 32. And behind them were Hoshaya and half of the officers of Judah, Azariah, Ezra, and Meshulam. Judah, Binyamin, Ushmaya, Yirmiyah. Now we're going to see so the Leviim were set up to make themselves into choirs and to sing words of Todat Hashem. And now what about the Kohanim? So some of the young Kohanim were blowing chatzotzrot, with trumpets. Zechariah ben Yonatan ben Shmaya ben Matanya ben Michya ben Zakur ben Asaph. Ve'echav Shmaya ve'Azrael milalai galai ma'ai Netanel v'Yehuda Hanani b'chlei shir David ish Elokim ve'Ezra sofer v'ifneihem. Gives us more names, and they were using the musical instruments of David HaMelech. Does that mean that David made them? Did it mean he inspired them? Don't know. And Ezra the Sofer. Ezra Sofer was there as well. Valshara Ain Vinegdam, and then on the fountain gate that was Alu al Malot Ir David, they went up the steps of Ir David, which by the way is Ir David of today, of course. And they went, this other group went on towards the water gate on the east. V'hatodah Hashenit, remember we said that he split them. So one group now we talked about. Now is the second group of the choir. Would march on the wall opposite the other group. And I was with them. And half the people were by the wall. Now what's the choma rechava? The broad wall. Every one of you, I am sure, has been in the old city near going down towards the Cardo, and before you enter the Jewish the plaza in the area, the Jewish quarter, which isn't a quarter, it's about a 16th. You'll know that if you look down towards the area of the Cardo, you see these columns in this long open area. There is a wall that is there. Now, if you're looking down, if to the left you'd be continuing towards the Kotel, to your right where the houses are, you'll notice there's a very low, but very, very, very deep wall. And that wall goes very far into the old city. And that is the broad wall of Chizkiyahu HaMelech. So when we learned about Chizkiyahu, and it's really more in Sefer Divrei Yamim, if I remember right, but we do talked about it in Sefer Melachim, that the broad wall that Chizkiyahu built in order to protect the city to strengthen the city, that's the broad wall we're talking about here. So you can picture where they were in this particular pasuk. Where exactly on the broad wall, I couldn't tell. Lamed Tet 39. You might remember when we first got to the beginning of this book, where I showed you this as Parak Gimel, I think, where it had the elliptical shape of the city, and it showed all the different gates where the people were working and fixing. So these are the gates. These are the names of those gates from back then. Telling us again where they stood and where they stopped when they were in the middle of the singing. Both groups of choirs stopped at the Beit HaMikdash. And I, with half of the skanim or the assistants, were with me. Mem Aleph 41. Vakonim Eliakim Masaya Minyamin Michya Elyon Einai Zechariah Hananiah B'Chatzotzot. These are the people who had the trumpets. Umasaya Shmaya Ve'Elazar Ve'Uzi Yochanan Malkiah Ve'Elam Ve'Ezer Ve'Yashmiu HaMeshorim Ve'Yazrechea HaPakid. Vayizbechu. What do they do? Vayizbechu Bayomahu Zvachim Gedolim. That day they brought a tremendous amount of sacrifices. Vayismachu, and they were joyous. Because God made them, gave them the opportunity, or infused them with this great joy. The Gamanashim, Vayeladim Samechu, the women and children also rejoiced. Vatishama Simchat Yerushalayim Merachok, and the sound of rejoicing Yerushalayim could be heard from afar. Vayipakdu Vayomahu Anashim Al Hanishachot Lotzarot Latrumot Lereshit L'Maasrot. At that point, there were people who were put in charge of the rooms or the chambers that were the treasuries for gifts and the bikurim and the maasrot, minaot hatorah lakohanim v'alavim kim sichat Yehuda lakohanim v'alavim haomdim. Because why? Remember, one of the things that when we talk about Tisha B'Av, we talk, we lost the Beit HaMikdash. That's very short-sighted to say. It's very not short-sighted. It's very narrow-minded to say we lost the Beit HaMikdash. Yes, it's true we lost the Beit HaMikdash. But think about the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of things and activities in Korbanot and Avodah of Yom Kippurim and the daily Avodah and the Birkat Kohanim and everything, the Ketoret, all those things that we lost. If you look in the keynote of Tisha B'Av, there's one that kind of details all these things. That, at least there isn't by Sfaradim. I actually forgot if it's by Ashkenazim. There's a similar one. It's just list over it all these different things that we lost. So now it's telling us that the beginning of the second Beit HaMikdash, imagine now, this is the flip side. This is before everything, goes downhill a few hundred years of all the joy that's about to start because of this new beginning. Pasuk Mem Hey 45. So what they did was they ensured the veracity of the kedusha and tara of the purity and the holiness of the place. Because those who were in charge, the singers, the choirs, and the leviim of giving thanks to Hashem, already existed in the time of David and Asaph. This is the future generations that are taking over now back with the second Beit HaMikdash. And keep in mind that David and Melech, obviously, there was no Beit HaMikdash at this time yet. In the time of Zerubbabel and the time of Nehemia, the contributions were made on a daily basis for the Leviim, and they made they were contributions for the Leviim, and Leviim had to give contributions to the Kohanim. This last pasuk is the only one I'm going to do a little bit more on. We'll do that Bezrat Hashem next week. But this last pasuk has a little bit more information. Plus, I'm going to show you how this connects to the end of Sefer Melachim in an interesting way. Next week, I just want as a preview of coming attractions. As soon as I get on my phone. Okay, let's see. Next Sunday night, Bezrat Hashem, next Yom Rishon at night, we have class. The one after that, we will not. I will be at a wedding, Bezrat Hashem, so maybe we'll try to do a Monday again if it works, Yom Sheni. The one after that, we should be okay. My working assumption is that before Pesach, we're going to finish with Sefer Nehemia. I will send out a message at some point before we do that, before we conclude, with a general idea of what we're going to do when we finish the Sefer Nehemia Bezrat Hashem. In the meantime, be well, stay healthy, stay safe, and pray for Am Yisrael. We need a refuah shlema in every sense of the word. Bezrat Hashem.